Today we're going to talk about exposure. Let's do it. So photography is all about light and using what light you have to tailor your image to exactly what you want. So if you watched my first video, you'll know that the catalyst for me becoming obsessed with photography was the 1 hour I spent talking about exposure. And today we're going to start a series about just that. So welcome to Exposure Basics, Part 1. Basic exposure can be broken down into 3 elements. One of those is how fast your image is taken, how much light you're letting into the pupil of your camera, and the third is how sensitive the sensor or the film is. These are essentially called the exposure triangle, and it looks a little bit something like this. So you have the shutter speed, the aperture or f-stop, and your ISO. Depending on how much available light you have, if you adjust one, you may have to adjust one or both of the others in order to get a properly exposed image. So let's look at each one. First, I'm going to talk about shutter speed. How fast you're physically opening and closing the shutter to let light onto your sensor or film. From seconds to a fraction of a second. The longer the shutter speed, the more blur you will introduce to a moving object, and the faster the shutter speed, the more you will freeze it. With a slower shutter, you're going to let in a lot more light. So there's a balance to it. To demonstrate, I'm going to use this film camera. This top dial on my camera has my shutter speed. So with a fast shutter, you'll notice that when I hit, it's a very quick image. Slowing the shutter speed down will give you a lot more light. If you look at these images, the first couple images are with a slower shutter speed. I'm trying to show the movement of the scene. This photo is also taken with a slower shutter speed, but because it's late at night, I'm able to let a lot more light in, capturing the Milky Way rising over the Grand Canyon. Now this sequence of photos was taken in South Africa. Super fun kid. I love the determination on his face, and this sequence of shots was taken in a high-speed continuous shutter, freezing the action at just the right moment. So next we're going to talk about aperture, and I'll show that here with this older manual lens. Now aperture is essentially the pupil or the iris of the camera. Just like your pupil that opens to let more light in, the aperture on your lens works the exact same way. As you lower the aperture number, the wider the aperture gets to let in more light. But on the opposite end, the more you will get in focus, a deeper depth of field. It's all about intent. The more open it is, the more you're going to blur out the background, which is great for portraits, but if you're manually focusing video, it can be a lot harder with a moving subject. The more closed the aperture is, the more depth of field you will get, which is great for landscapes. There is a lot in focus from the foreground to the background. Next up is ISO or gain. ISO is essentially how hard your camera is looking for light, how sensitive your sensor is. When you have a low ISO, you'll have a much cleaner image. When there's less available light, turning up your ISO will have your camera looking harder for the light that is there. But the higher you turn up the ISO, the more noise you're going to get in the image. So there's a trade-off depending on how much light you actually have available. Exposure is the balance of light in your image from highlights to shadows. Overexposing will look ugly and blow out your highlights. Underexposing will make your image too dark to be able to see any detail. Finding the balance is incredibly important. So in the next video, we're going to talk about how these apply in video, because while the principle is the same, the application might be a little bit different. So that's going to be it for me this time. If you like this video, if you found it helpful, or if you're just a photography geek like me, give it a thumbs up, subscribe, hit the notification bell, check out the last few videos. I greatly appreciate you being here, and I'll see you in the next video. Peace. Let's try this again now that the audio recorder is on. Can't believe I did that.